our top story tonight. Will we or won't we keep funding countries like Libya and Egypt as anti-American violence escalates there? A group of House Republicans is saying no, we should not. The House is set to vote any minute now on the continuing resolution, which includes almost $7 billion in Mideast aid provisions. But is cutting all the aid for these countries really a good plan? Mike Barrett is a principal with the international security consulting firm Diligent Innovations. Thanks for joining me, Mike. What is the downside, do you think, to cutting aid to Egypt and Libya? Because it's very tempting right now.
Sure, it's clearly very tempting, and I think it would feel very good emotionally. But the reality is the money that we're giving to Egypt goes to the military. If there's one thing that's keeping the Muslim Brotherhood, which is, has the presidency there, if there's one thing that's keeping them in line, it's the military. The military is pretty well educated. They tend to be a little bit more Western. They tend to be pretty advanced. So they really are kind of a bulwark there that's really helping the long-term interest of the United States and of modernity. And if we cut off the funding, then we're really only strengthening the hand of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Well, I mean, we give $1.6 billion. That's what's slated this year to go to Egypt. And as you said, $1.3 billion of that goes to the military. But it doesn't seem like they are keeping things very safe. When you look at the pictures of the rioting and the protest that's going on, and of course you look at what happened to our embassy. I mean, we're looking at the pictures right there. And this is a country where we're giving money to the military. Where is that money going?
Well, so really, again, you have to think about it as two things. One, it's basically a risk insurance policy regarding Israel. So ever since the Camp David Accords, we've been giving this money to Egypt, and basically it's a quid pro quo whereby they keep peace with Israel. So if you think about what we're spending per hour, per day in Afghanistan when we're actively at war, that's a huge bill. $1.3 billion a year is actually really not all that much money. It sounds like a lot, but at the end of the day, it's not that much.
But is it working, though? Is it working? Is it doing what we think it's supposed to be doing?
It's doing the one thing that probably matters the most, which is that it's keeping Egypt and Israel at peace. And so from that point of view, it's actually a pretty good deal. The other thing to remember is that the $1.3 billion, we don't actually give them the cash. What we do is we give it to them almost like a credit, and then they spend it on American weapons. So it actually does create jobs here at home as well. It's not just a pure cash transfer. I do think that, it would make sense perhaps for the House to vote to take just a small amount, just to, as a symbolic measure. But I think it would be really, really dangerous in the long run if we actually cut it, because then the Muslim Brotherhood leadership will be very likely to violate that treaty with Israel, which, again, for 3 decades has helped keep the peace there.
Well, I had a lot of people on earlier today, saying that we're trying to buy friends with this money and that it's clearly not working. What do you think about that perspective?
Well, I think, the difference between a bribe and a payment that you're doing in order to avoid risk can sometimes look an awful lot the same. But at the end of the day, $1.3 billion, while it feels like a lot of money, we're trillions of dollars in debt. I think as a country we have massive economic problems and things we need to deal with. But this is not the straw that's going to break the camel's back in terms of our national debt outlook. And unfortunately, it could actually be the straw that breaks the camel's back in terms of plunging us into war if Egypt backs away from Israel, and then you end up with that regional conflagration getting even worse.
It is the symbolic nature, though, of what's going on, that we are giving money to people who appear to hate us. I mean, does that weaken our standing around the world? Do we look like idiots when we're doing something like that?
Well, my personal opinion is that we look like idiots for a lot of reasons right now in terms of our foreign policy. You had the Secretary of State, Clinton, come out yesterday and say that it was confounding that this would happen in Libya, a place where we've, worked so hard to try to help set up the new government. Well, it's not confounding at all. I mean, what we've done is we've taken very strong leaders and we helped depose them, and now we're left with the chaos that's there. And so I think ultimately you're down to this really fundamental foreign policy debate, which is, do you achieve peace through security, which is where people like myself come down as realists, or do you achieve peace through negotiations, open hands? Remember, the president famously came in and said that he was going to negotiate with anybody, anytime, with no preconditions, extending an open hand to every country. And, while that sounds good and it seems like great political rhetoric, the reality is that it's naive, particularly when you're talking about a place like the Middle East where everyone's so well armed.
So what does all that mean? I mean, what should we really be doing right now to stop this tide of hatred that's coming at us? What could we really do today?
Well, I think, one of the big pieces in Egypt is, again, to make it very clear that we expect them to abide by their international commitments. It's also to strengthen the hand, again, of the military and of the moderates. I think a lot of Americans here felt like we could strengthen the hands of the people on the streets, and that, hey, these were young people and they were pro-democracy. And the reality is what we did is we took out the strong dictator and we enabled the Muslim Brotherhood to come in. So you get into a lot of, public relations and trying to put a good foot forward for Western thought and for modernity. But I think you also have to be careful not to just appear weak in city after city, and which is what we're doing right now.
Yeah, it's a really tough situation to say the least. Mike Barrett, thanks for coming on.